Depending on what color you want your skin, you may use a totally different combo. If you're using a different marker than what I'm using, your colors may be totally different, and that's fine. I'm not worried about what colors you use for your skin, and I'm not saying that these are the best or what you have to use. It's just what I generally use to teach with. I find they're easy combo to use, especially if you're starting out. But like I said, if you're looking for Latino or African American skin combos, you could certainly go darker. If you have a different Caucasian mix that you use, go ahead and use it. It's fine. If you've watched my videos before, you've heard me say dark to light. I color dark to light for a reason. That means when I'm coloring, I'm using a flicking motion. The side of your brush is what you want to color with. We don't want to color like this and have fine lines. You want to color in very large strokes, as much as you can fit. And then you would take your lighter color and you would blend out from there. So I'm just picking up the tail ends of that dark color and I'm moving it forward so that you get that soft blend. That's what you're looking for. If I use the dark, and I lay some down, and I'm pushing my light this way into it, it's going to get a very weird muddy look as it dries. It starts getting speckled. You can kind of see those speckles popping up. And it gets a little bit muddy. That's not what we're looking for. That's why we never bring the light into the dark. So always move from dark, medium, light if you have 3 colors. So here we're using a dark and a light. So you're going to stroke your color on, and then you're picking up just the tail edges and you're moving it forward. So I'm not doing this. I'm actually lifting my brush each time to move it forward until I've blended it. And you may have to do that multiple times. Some people think that they should only have to go in once and blend. That's not true. Depending how much ink you've laid down, what paper you're using, what color you're using, will depend on how many times you have to blend that out. Set in your ways and you go light to dark and it works for you, that's fine, but I would at least encourage you to try the other way and see how that works for you. It's going to feel a little odd, especially if you don't use the side of your brush tip. So however you need to hold your marker to get that angle on the brush is fine. It's going to feel a little weird sometimes to actually hold the marker sideways in color, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. We're just going to work on her face and arms, and then I'll show you my finished version and how I did her legs. The technique is really the same. So the biggest thing you have to worry about when you pick out your image is where your light is coming from. It's called light sourcing, and a lot of people get stressed over that. They feel that it's too hard for them to figure out, but it's really simple. Keep it simple. For this image, she's kind of facing towards the left, so for me, the sun would be coming, or whatever the light is, would be coming this way. And all that means is that the left side of her body on every part of the image is going to be light, and that's what gives you dimension. Instead of having light here and light here and light here and light here bouncing all over, you're giving your image some consistent shading, and that's what's going to make it pop off the paper, make it dimensional. We're working with flat images, so you want to give it a little bit of a pop. So pick which side you want your light on. Generally it's left or right or in the center. And that doesn't mean shining down on her, but shining kind of towards the middle of her. And you can pick whichever you want, whatever works best for you. I usually kind of let my image dictate it, and that's why for her I'm going to have my light come on the left side. So that means on her face, she's going to be mostly light skinned here, and then more shadowed on the right side. I'm going to bring a little bit of shadow over here on the left side just to mimic the roundness of her face. She's a flat image obviously, but we still want to give the illusion that her face is round. And then under her neck, that left part of her neck is going to be light, but the right side is going to be shaded. Same thing on each arm. The right side of the arm is going to be shaded. The right side of this arm is going to be more shaded. And then common sense areas are going to be shaded as well. The palm of her hand, kind of her underarm area, where her fingers fold under. So those are all things you have to think about when you're coloring. So these are things you're always going to think about when you're coloring an image, whether it's a person, a flower, an animal, whatever. Always think how the light is going to play into the image, and that's going to make your images that much more dimensional, realistic looking, which is what we want. We want them to really pop out. on your projects, your coloring should always be the first thing people notice, not everything around it. So really take the time to put into your coloring, and you'll notice a huge difference. What I like to do, and E00 is actually what I'm using for my lightest color. Starting with the face, I'm just going to put my first coat of color down. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you get a little bit in the hair, it's okay. It's a pretty light color. So I'm going to go all the way down and just lay my first, and you can do this with any color, any part of the image. You can always lay your lightest color down. We're going to be adding and blending over it. It's kind of like a primer or base coat, I like to say. So that's E00. Now we're going to go in with our shading. So I know that the right side of this face is going to be a little bit darker. So I'm using as much of the side as I can. It's a little smaller area, so we have to be a little bit more careful. And then I'm going to blend that out. So just like I showed you on that scrap piece of paper, I'm pulling the edges of that dark color forward very lightly. Make sure you're using a very light touch. The more ink you put in your paper, the harder it is to blend. So always use a light touch. And then again, I just want a little bit of shadow over here, just to show that dimension in her face. And then again, pulling it out and blending very lightly. And you can do this as many times as you want. When it's wet, it's going to be darker. So usually you have to come back and maybe add a little bit more dark depending on how deep the color you want. So always remember, by the time we finish her legs, her face may have dried a little bit too light. So I may go in and add a little bit more color, or I may not. It just depends on how dark you want. Now you can get fancy like I did and add a little bit of the nose shadow. That's up to you. If you're not comfortable kind of going in and adding that, you don't have to. You can stick to just basic shading. So there's definitely two ways that you can do that. Start with the easiest first and then work from there. Don't make it too hard on yourself. It leads to frustration and then you're not having fun anymore. And my basic rule of coloring is always you need to be having fun while you're doing it. So let's go down to her neck. Again, I know this side is going to be light, but there's going to be some shadowing under her neck because her head is going to shadow down there. Always blend out right away. Don't skip down and start shadowing all of her arm, and then try to go back in with your lightest. It's going to be dry by then and it's going to be a lot harder to blend. So each time you're adding shadow, make sure you're blending it. I know she's going to have some shadow where her underarm area is. I'm going to blend that out. And then on her arm, I know this side of her arm is going to be much darker since it's away from the light. And again, you need to blend. You don't want harsh lines in your coloring. It should blend, the color should fade from one color to the next very softly. And you can keep coming in and adding a little bit more dark. It just depends on how dark you like to go. I notice that most people find it hard to color skin. They don't usually go dark enough. I think they're afraid that the skin's going to look maybe like a Oompa Loompa or just get way too dark. And that's usually not the case, because by the time you finish the image with all the colors and everything else and you put it on a project with pattern paper, your skin will tend to fade away. And you want it to match the rest of your coloring. So if you have very intense shading on the rest of the image, then your skin should have the same amount of shading from dark to light. Otherwise they'll end up looking like Casper. So there's that arm. She has her little, where her collarbone area is, and then of course where her upper chest is. I always add just a little shadow here, kind of in a V shape, just to go along with what's drawn. You don't have to. It's just something I do. Again, it just adds a little bit more into your images. And then going into the other arm, her underarm is going to be a little bit darker, of course. And then so is this side of the arm. So when you're coloring, I call it flicking. Came up with that name many moons and years ago. It's kind of a flicking motion, just like I showed you on the scrap paper when you're coloring. It's kind of a flick down and up, down and up. So every time that's what you're kind of doing, down and up, down and up. A lot of people in my classes, and I've taught, I'm not even sure how many people I've taught over the years, but most people find it very uncomfortable to do at first. But the more you tell yourself to do it, the more that you have success with using the side of your brush and flicking, the easier it gets. Yes, I went out of the lines there. The easier it gets for you. And then you start learning how to control it. That's the problem most people find at first, is with the flicking, they tend to go out of the lines a lot. And that's okay. It's a learning process. It doesn't need to be perfect the first time. For that area there, you could use your colorless blender. It's very light, so you could just push that right back in. You don't even have to worry about it. To me, it's a non-issue. So please don't stress over things like that. As I said, some of this has gotten a little lighter. So again, you can come in and add a little bit more of that shadow as you feel necessary. Adding one layer at a time, you'll never go too dark. Another little tip, if you have any Spicas, they're the Copic version of a glitter pen. This is just the black one. They work with the Copic, so you don't have to worry about bleeding or anything like that. A lot of times when I stamp, even with a juicy ink pad, sometimes my eyes don't get black enough and they kind of fade out. This has just a little bit of sparkle, so I'll go over the eyes or eyelashes, depending on what I want, and just deepen that. It has a very subtle sparkle, so it adds a little something to your eyes and your coloring as well. And you could use that right over your Copics as well. So if you have a purple dress and you had a clear Copic Spica, you could color over it with the Spica a little bit, highlight it, and it will give it a little shimmer. So just something else to think about when you're coloring. Some people like to add blush to the cheeks, some people don't. Again, that's a personal thing. I usually add a little bit. I like the extra color on the face. One of my favorites is using R20. Doesn't mean that's the color you have to use, but I just go in just a little bit and add a little bit of cheek color. And then I'm using R22 for her lips. I just want her lips to be a little bit darker. And that's pretty much it. And then you have her skin. So just little bits at a time. On her legs, it's going to be very similar to what you did on the arms. The right side of the legs are going to be shadowed. And of course, where her dress, we can see that her dress is flying up in the air, but we would know that underneath on her thigh it would be shadowed a little bit. So that's why I've colored that a little bit darker. And a little bit, I've brought a little shadow into the knee as well. It's not something you have to do. It's kind of like the collarbone area that I did. You just add a little bit of shadow here to emphasize that that's the roundness of her knee. So skin, to me, one of the easiest things to do.